start as soon as we're streaming, right?
Nice.
Hello, everyone, and happy Thursday. Thank you for joining us. This is your first time here, I'm Ashley Doole, CEO of Doole Dev LLC. I'm joined with my co-host, Natasha Velez at NVS Strategic Solutions, and we have a special guest today. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, please meet Bradley Lewis of HiQ Group.
Everyone.
And if you make sure that we are on here. So I have I met Brad probably a year ago, and I had the pleasure of attending a BD masterclass that him and his partner put on. And I, having been in the government contracting space for such a while, was completely humbled by all the things that I didn't know about relationships. And I kind of thought I knew a little bit. So I wanted to have Bradley here today because I know we talk about that a lot. And, how to build the relationship with government agency and, how to use emotional intelligence to win more contracts is a mystery to a lot of us. So,
Right.
um, I want to, oh, yes, we are. There it goes. Sorry about that, guys. I had a little bit of audio trouble there. But we all know that, winning government contracts requires, a level of intel, especially if you're going after those that, aren't just under the simplified acquisition threshold. When you get to the millions and billions of dollars, if you haven't had a meeting with a customer, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to bid on the contract. But Bradley, if you could kind of tell us, in your opinion, what makes these relationships different, and how do you know when you have one, really?
So let me start with this before I dive into the answer to that question. Let me just kind of set some expectations. So everything I'm going to share with you today is going to be common sense. It's just not common practice. So we're going to focus on the relationships, and this will be a little bit woo-woo for some of us. I took a course very similar to this 35 years ago, and it was a game changer. And it allowed me to write productive contracts and take relationships from just normal chit chat to what I call winning relationships. So we've trademarked that. Um, so what I'm going to share with you today, if you'll stick with us, there should be a link in the chat to some of our templates and things that you can use if it's helpful for you. But I'm going to dive into just the concept of what a relationship is and what it's not. So let me start with this. Most of us think we have really good relationships, and it's usually not the case. So we overestimate our relationship quality. We have surface level chit chats about vacation and the kids playing baseball together and all this stuff that we think implies intimacy. And when in fact, it's usually not productive. And when I say productive, it doesn't usually produce game changing intel that tells you exactly what the customer needs, what their priorities are, what's driving them personally, and what they're really looking for. And so the message that I want to kind of start with is it's a human experience. And the relationship component of it is what makes it all work. And even though the federal government has lots of regulations and lots of bureaucracy, if you don't have the relationships and you don't really get that call early on and you don't really know what's going on, you're making a lot of assumptions. And so if you're blindly bidding and you don't have those relationships and you don't have the intimacy and you don't really know what's going on and you don't know before the RFP drops that you're going to win, you're probably not. So I don't want to exaggerate it, but the relationship component of working in the government contracting space is huge, and it's probably the number one key KPI that we don't measure. We don't measure relationship quality. And so we're working toward releasing a tool for our groups that will be able to use that so you'll kind of know where you really stand with a customer as opposed to making assumptions and just looking on sam.gov and trying to find a deal to bid on, so to speak. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ashley.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Why, though, why is emotional intelligence critical for developing these winning relationships? Sort of what's the tie in there?
Yeah. Okay. So emotional intelligence, let me start with all decisions for human beings are emotional. We support them rationally. We support them with business cases and rationalization and logic. And the reason I bought this car, the reason I did, something over something else. There's lots of reasons people do things. But the most important thing I can tell you is that customers feel your intention whether you know it or not. They hear your words, they look at your body language, they feel it in your intention. And so emotional intelligence is really the notion that you can be self-aware and practice self-control and make sure that how you choose to communicate with your customers is really connected in such a manner that they feel that you have their best interest at heart, and then they know that you're going to take care of them. And in that chemistry is what makes them lean in and ask you for help as opposed to you chasing them later. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes
Absolutely.
perfect sense.
Absolutely. And
So,
I've witnessed that happening several times, once you kind of get in the door with an agency, even if it's, your micro offer, they have an opportunity to see how good you are at what you do. And, it often does lead to bigger contracts. I'm sorry, Natasha, what were you going to say?
no, I really liked everything he said. And I think sometimes when we're building a relationship, we have this thing in our mind where we're constantly thinking about what we want out of the relationship. And I think that's where we kind of limit our emotional intelligence because we're like, give us a contract or give us money or give us like anything versus understanding that it's really about the client, it's about the customer and their pain points and what they need from you and the solution that you can provide. And that is a long-term relationship that has to build over time and has to almost organically kind of come together and eventually kind of builds into that solidification where, money is exchanged and, services. But that takes time. That doesn't happen in a one-time moment. So I absolutely agree with that. I did want to ask you, so you've trained many, many teams, and at this point, I was wondering, what is the main problem that prompts leaders to kind of give you that phone call and say, I need help? What is their main pain point?
Yeah, good question, Tasha. It's almost always growth. In other words, companies are trying to figure out how they grow. And when I say grow, I mean the basics of how do
Mhm.
I open the right doors? How do I ask the right questions? And to your point, how do I remain fully present while the
Yeah.
customer is talking? And when I say that, most of us are thinking about what we're going to say next, or to use your words, what we want.
Yeah.
And instead, if you shift that energy to the customer and you understand what they want and what's driving them, it changes the dynamics of the conversation entirely. So the answer to your question is when we get calls from customers, and we've trained, I think, 26 or 2,700 people now in this space, it's almost always about growth. It's about team collaboration, and it's about customer intimacy. And when I say growth, what I mean is people who have contracts want to create growth within those contracts. Some people who have contracts want to win their recompetes, and others are completely focused on new pursuits. So, what I would say to you is having intimate relationships and really focusing on the customer is a means to produce growth, but the focus is on taking care of them and them knowing you have their best interest at heart, as opposed to how quickly you can make a sale. And the magic here is they feel it. You don't even have to say it. They will feel you if they think that you're just there for you and you're
Right.
asking the same questions everyone else asks. I mean, they're qualifying an opportunity and you show up at bid time and your tail's wagging and you're ready. And the problem with that
Yeah.
is it turns them off. They resist you, and they won't even tell you that they're resisting you. And you'll get the same answers everyone else gets, but you won't get the real inside information that tells you what to do to align and how to make them happy and how to win.
I would agree. And I think that's funny that you say that. It's almost like the same dynamic no matter what stage of the capture BD process you're in,
Yes.
because it goes starting in that way in the capture process to get that information from the client and their pain point starts in that regard. But even down to the proposal part, we are trained to really kind of focus, even in our writing, to name the client before we name ourselves. Like, so we wouldn't go MVS strategic solutions plans on, we would say, HHS would needs the following, and and we intend to provide this solution. So it's always like trying to remind yourself that this is about your client and understanding and making them aware that you know who they are and what they need. So I like
100%.
it's crazy how that transition just keeps going.
No, I would add to it. In other words, what I would say it very directly. The customers care about themselves. They're narcissistic in the sense that they have their own needs, they have their own challenges, and they need somebody to take care of them. And when you show up with a capabilities briefing and you show that you care about yourself, it's a
Yeah.
complete turnoff in both the capture and frankly, even from a delivery perspective. I want to add to the notion of BD and capture. We'll train as many or more program managers and subject matter experts and task
Mhm.
leads this year than we will BD and capture people because they're part of that ecosystem that takes care of the customer. And you have to communicate using the same common language and the same playbook in order to make sure that the customer actually gets what you're promising them. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it
Oh yeah,
takes your
no,
point.
we're always told to understand your customer's language so
Exactly.
that you can speak apples to apples. So absolutely. But that's where we've touched on the subject many times, the whole market intelligence and analysis and really understanding your buyer. And not every single buyer is the same. So
Yeah,
absolutely, I get it.
absolutely.
That's
And
right.
and
Every agency is different. Every human
Mhm.
within that agency is different. Very true.
absolutely. And just to dumb all this down, what we're really talking about is people skills. We're talking about the soft interpersonal skills that it takes to really connect with someone, understand, be present, and really allow them to talk through and vet their options and their solutions with you as an advisor, more so than you just trying to position to sell something or pounce on them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would even add to that because I think I had a client the other day tell me people don't like me. He's like in a really high IT cybersecurity, great company. But he's like, people don't like me. Like, how am I supposed to sell? And I'm like, you're not. You're the type of person I'd tell to be quiet in the room. You hire
Right,
someone that can. You
right.
get someone and you align someone that can. Not everyone can, but as you grow in your business, you know what your weaknesses are, and then you kind of build yourself with the people around you that have those strengths to kind of help you out. So having that, if you're an introvert and you don't find it comfortable to reach out and speak, then find someone that can on your behalf. Um,
100%. I
and
was
they,
telling Ashley before you even jumped on the call, I'm nerdy and I'm an introvert, and I can still be my authentic self and show up and just listen to customers and plug in, and they'll
yeah,
accept me because they know that I care and they know I have their best interest at heart. So part of them liking you is for them to be able to talk and feel validated, and you know when to be quiet and listen.
yes.
That's a very good
Okay.
point. And that actually is a great segue in my next question. And I witnessed something at the conference actually that was along these lines, but I
Mm,
want to see if perhaps it's one that you also experienced, Bradley. What are like the worst habits that you see from contractors in this
gosh,
space?
He already
yeah, that's
mentioned the capabilities thing.
Well, yeah, we mentioned the whole what can you do for me, but
Yeah, that's a good
you know,
one.
that's a
what
really
are the
good one.
typical bad habits?
I'll give you, let me just, rather than reel off, because there's a lot, rather than reel off all the idiosyncrasies that we all have, by the way, we're all guilty of most of this stuff,
Mhm.
We're all
is
human.
absolutely. Most of us don't really prepare properly for meetings. In other words, if you look at your calendar and you see how much time you have blocked off to prepare for meetings, most of it's very little. We don't anticipate what we might be able to do with the customers. And then worse, as I mentioned, we go in and we ask the same thing everyone else asks. We don't flex, we don't stay with the customer, we don't drill into their priorities. And so we don't uncover what matters most to them, and we don't find discriminators for our proposal. So what I would say is at the core of this is we're self-focused. We're not fully present. We don't listen and dig in. And in that digging in is where the magic happens. It's where you really find out what people need and what's motivating them to take action, or maybe what's motivating them to do nothing. And you need to know that as well. So by asking the right questions and digging in and staying present with your customers, you'll get intel that 95% of the people don't on the planet don't get. So that's just one symptom. There's lots of things, but if you leave one of our courses and you know how to plan, anticipate problems, open the right doors, and really dig out what matters, you'll know long before the business is ever awarded exactly where you stand. And that's half the battle, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
Absolutely. And, you know, so the scenario that I witnessed at actually a government procurement conference this week, they did matchmaking sessions.
Mm.
And I was standing by and I watched at least a dozen small businesses sit down at the table, give their elevator pitch, and more or less ask, what contracts can you give me? Or what can you do for me? And I know this is kind of, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but they didn't ask any questions as far as, what that prime might have needed and what gaps they might be able to fulfill. So it wasn't really a customer centric approach. And as a human, how would you feel walking away from a conversation like that? Like, let's be real, you've waited, you've spent all this money, you've traveled to this event, you sit down at the table, and somebody just is expecting a handout without showing any value. Is that
Yeah.
pretty
And
common?
well, I don't know how common it is, but I can tell you that nobody cares. In other
Mm.
words, I know it's very direct, but when you start waiting for a chance to pounce on someone or pitch something, and it's clear that you're focused on you, nobody
Right.
really wants to hear all of that. So if you're not reverse engineering your statements into questions to really better understand, and we'll talk about at some point in the future, we'll talk about how you can position yourself so the customer knows that you care, and the right words and the right intention. But if you're
Right.
not asking questions and digging into what matters to them, you're looking at it backward, frankly, is probably the easiest way to say it. So I would resist the temptation to do that if you can.
Well, over
Yeah.
time, I would think with the whole emotional intelligence, if people really kind of worked on gaining better emotional intelligence, how much better do you think their conversations and their sales practices will become?
I mean, it changes probability of win dramatically. I consider that a byproduct of taking care of the customer and doing the right thing.
Mhm.
But if you treat people like you would want to be treated, you'll be amazed. First, you'll be in the inner circle. They'll tell you things they don't tell everyone. They'll tell you early. They'll call you to vet their solutions and their options and talk to you as if you're on the same side of the desk. It really does change the dynamics of the relationship entirely.
I would agree. Okay.
Absolutely. And when you do a good job, and this is a true story, I'm certainly not going to mention any names, but when you do a really good job, and I had never seen this happen before until recently, one of our community members and a client um, received a phone call from DC with nothing else except a verbal read off of a solicitation number that was going
Mm,
to be awarded quickly. That was the end of the conversation, no identity. And she ended up winning the contract. She was already submitting her response for it, and she ended up winning it. But they trust her. They like
yes.
her. They knew that a complex situation like that is going to require someone that they have in a level of a relationship with already. So I'd never seen that happen before, and it doesn't always. So don't expect it necessarily, but I tell you that to demonstrate the power of, if you do practice the emotional intelligence to understand your customer and you're able to speak specifically, whether it's through your proposal or through your solution to that customer's pain points and solve their problems, your trust level goes up, right?
It's so
That's
big.
it is essentially, it could be a deal breaker, maker or breaker.
It
Um,
usually is a deal breaker. In other words, I'll say it differently. You're always the differentiator, you as a human being. They buy you first. And if they don't buy you and they don't trust you, they're
Yeah,
not going to buy your company or your capabilities or anything else. If you don't have trust, nothing that you say is believable. It's a claim. So this trust and being connected emotionally is the human condition. But we overlook it. We get so busy and so caught up in our day that we're trying to get things done and collect intel for the next gate review and figure out. We're trying too hard. We put the pressure on ourselves to try to figure out all the ways we could position when all you have to really do is just care, be quiet, ask the customer, listen, fully plug in, and discern whether or not it's a good fit. And if it's a natural fit, you'll figure that out together. If it's not, you live to fight another way. But to your point, trust is everything.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to chime in on something also. It's not also about only the beginning of a relationship, because sometimes people will be extra amazing and care about their client to win a contract, right? And again, I won't say any names, but I had a client that won a nice 8-figure 5-year contract.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were living high. It was great. Good 5 years, right? The last year comes along, and I want to say the last 2 years of that contract, project management slipped, quality control slipped, everyone got a little comfortable, a little lazy. And you saw in that 2 years how sales declined, how the conversations stopped, the meetings, like after a while, I think their project managers stopped showing up even to the meetings. And
Wow.
so over time, you saw what was an 8-figure deal that could have been another 5-year extension turn into $0.
A
And then
recompete probably
layoffs
after
had to,
year 4. Yeah.
yeah, and then layoffs had to happen. And that's because when you win your contract, that's the best time to know your client because you're working front and center with them. So if you're not building to learn their pain points and to build upon the contract that you have and get an extension or delivery orders or a new contract or find better ways to do business with them to expand that and keep that going, you can quite easily lose any business with that agency forever if you
Yeah,
don't
it's
do a
just like any other healthy relationship, right? In other words, it doesn't stop when you win the contract. It actually begins just like when you get married. You don't stop having fun and stop communicating and stop trying to figure out what to do together to build and be happy. So
Right.
absolutely, when you're talking about letting things unravel, it's a choice, right? And I'll tell you the other thing that comes to mind. We work with a lot of government contracting firms, all sizes, and the competition now is more fierce than it's ever been. I was just on the phone with someone an hour ago of a pretty big firm here, was the chief growth officer. And she said to me, at every opportunity we're pursuing, even our own, where we own the contracts, there are 6 competitors at the table. So what we're doing is we're training their delivery teams and their PMs to be able to plug in, create the intimacy with a customer, and bring home opportunities. And more importantly, make sure that the customer's getting what they want beyond just schedule and budget and quality and all that. It's not checking
right.
things off a list. That's only part of it. It's how do I foster this love? How do I foster this trust? How do I keep it going and make sure that I'm serving and taking care of these people?
Yeah,
Absolutely. Don't
that's
get
excellent.
comfortable for 1 minute because everyone's waiting for that recompete.
Right?
Absolutely. But
That's true.
the message here, it's about people. It's about taking
Yeah.
care of people and actually caring beyond just your own needs to check something off a list or win a contract.
Oh
That's
yeah.
very true. What's something, Bradley, let's give our listeners something that they can like take away and actually maybe even put to action in their next meeting. What's a simple way to demonstrate that you're focused on the customer and have their best interests at heart during the first meeting?
Wow, that's a big question. Okay. So I will try to give you something very, very simple. Um, what we teach is a step-by-step structure or process that you can follow in any meeting. So later, if you want to, if you need any of the templates or guides or videos to do some of this stuff, I'm sure there's some kind of link or something you can send out, Ashley. It'll
Right.
give people a tip.
Yep.
But I'll try to give you just a practical tip of this structure. So most people start a meeting, just starting a meeting, they're busy. They don't take time to warm it up and connect, or if they do, worse, they go just through the motions and the customer feels it. And then they never establish purpose or empathy up front. And as simple as this sounds, what every single meeting I have, I always start the meeting with the purpose of my visit is to better understand you and your needs, to see if we can help. And I don't assume that we can. Would it be okay if I ask you some questions? And I know that sounds real simple, but 95% of the people don't start a meeting that way. They don't start with the intention being focused on the customer. Their intention is to see if I can find something I can jump on or write a contract around or bid on, as opposed to allowing them to warm up, allowing them to know that you really care about them, and take the time like a doctor would to understand diagnostically what are the symptoms, what are their needs, what's happening at root cause, what's making all this happen. And if you don't connect with people on that level of depth, you're having the same surface level conversations that everybody else is having. It becomes very transactional, and the feeling leads the conversation. So back to your original question, if I were to give you a tip, it's always start your meetings with purpose, put the customer's needs, and choose your words. We script all this stuff. You can have access to it if your audience needs it. But give them real clarity around the fact that you care. And then when they start talking, I'll give you an acronym. It's called QLP: question, listen, pause. And as simple as that is ask the questions. We talked about not asking questions earlier. Actually stay present and listen. And then the pause gives you a chance to internalize what they're saying. I take notes. I'm a note taker. I write down what they said, and I think through how to dig into that and put myself in their position and visualize what they're up against. And if you're not having that level of clarity or that level of granularity in a meeting, you're probably not really in the deal, even though you think you are, you want to be.
And I will say, from someone who's been through High Q Group Speedy Masterclass, and Bradley, you kind of alluded to it in the beginning, a lot of this, is kind of like an aha moment. It was for me in the masterclass.
Mhm.
The dynamic of the conversation, when you remember to just kindly ask permission to ask them some questions,
Yep.
you would be
So nice.
surprised at how the answers that they give you will change
Yeah.
versus if you don't ask. I found it to be an excellent icebreaker, and it's respectful. You're kind of leaping off on a good foot. And I found that that has been one of my biggest takeaways from the masterclass that I've been putting to practice, that really has just been like, an aha moment and a relief, because you yourself get more comfortable also having their permission.
100%. I mean, it takes the anxiety. If you learn to ask questions and drill in and let the customer drive, and just the flow of information changes, it'll relieve the pressure. It'll take all of the anxiety off of you feeling like you got to make it happen, and just plug in and find out if it naturally aligns. And I have more customers say, we never have meetings like this. We never have anybody come in and actually sit down with us and ask us what we need and care.
Right.
Everybody's so interested in themselves and what they can sell that they miss the point. So it absolutely changes the dynamics and the chemistry of a conversation 100% different than the way most people do it. 95% of people do not do this. And it's simple.
I would agree. I think
Absolutely.
everybody's got that, what is that, the telemarketer approach, where it's like we
Right.
got all these, we've got a rebuttal for everything. And I'm like, that's not the way it's supposed to work. That's manipulation.
It
Um,
is. Well, listen, if you're persuading or manipulating or trying to convince somebody to do something, people will resist you. Nobody wants
We're
to
going to
be
see through
sold.
that. Yeah.
Nobody. I think one of my pet peeves is when people just say, Natasha, when I pick up the phone, I'm like, immediately I hang up on you. We don't know each other. How dare you? Don't assume. So it's one of those things where like manners and being proper and acquisitive and humbling yourself really does wonders
It
versus being
100%.
does.
self.
It very much does.
Yeah,
And I would love to keep going with you guys. We could probably talk about this and give
all
information
day.
all night, but I know Restream will cut us off in 2 minutes sharp. So I do want to make sure the audience knows that there is a link in the chat or in the comments on YouTube for the call planning guide that Bradley mentioned for individuals. There's a template, a call planning worksheet in there, the video guide to include the purpose statement, and the right and wrong way to open a call. So you can grab that for free at the link. I'm also going to edit this to put it in the description once we are done with the live. And there's also the course curriculum for teams. So feel free to check out that link, grab those resources, and I would love to hear your feedback, guys. I mean, if you're using it, you're putting it to action, come back, jump in the comments, tell us what's working for you, tell us how your calls are going.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I wasn't sure what we had planned to give away, but what I would tell you is this is how you make your acquisition process work. This is simple. It's people skills. For technical people, it's the double threat where they actually have the people skills and the expertise. And what I would tell you is it'll increase your win rates. You'll make smarter investments, and it'll stop the scramble. You'll not bid on everything just because you found it on sam.gov. You'll actually walk down and properly assess an opportunity and see if you can actually help the customer. So it changes everything. So hopefully it's been valuable, and I'm happy to help any way we can, Ashley.
Well, thank you so much, Bradley. Thank you for coming on. Thank you, Natasha. This was really great. It was good to have a refresh and kind of go back to master class. And I plan on taking those sessions again, just to kind of refine my skills. So I really
Awesome.
appreciate your time today and for the awesome resources. Thank you to your team as well. And we are at 7:30, so they probably cut us off.